Welcome to Put Simply, the podcast that puts what's happening in the world simply without compromising on the details. Erdem Koch is my name, Rodney McCune and Ozan Ibrisim my co-hosts. And for 2026, gents, welcome back. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, guys, 2026. It's
Oh,
the year I've been waiting for.
I just realized this is our third year of doing the podcast. Not bad.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Consistency, if nothing else.
Well, consistency in a year that I think has already set a staggering benchmark. After 2025, of course, the year when the unthinkable started to feel normal. Over the weekend, the United States crossed a line many thought unimaginable, with President Donald Trump intervening in Venezuela, President Nicolás Maduro, and transferring him, along with his wife, to the US to face trial. It's been a remarkable, unsettling few days. Events that once belonged in the realm of political thrillers now seem to be unfolding in real time, and the global order feels like it's shifting beneath our feet. Rodney, kick us off with some context. How on earth did we get here?
Look, I think it's some form of societal grooming that it conditions people to not see the next step as worse than what had just taken place or whatever. In the last couple of weeks, we've had these alleged drug vessels blown out of the water, with some allegations that survivors were machine gunned, while they're clinging on to life rafts and so on. And that didn't really cause a sufficient uproar to stop Trump from moving on to the next step. And the next step was, it's pretty remarkable that this has happened. It's remarkable in that it was so easy, although clearly a lot of planning went into it, that it was executed so well. But it is the extraterritorial kidnap of a foreign head of state and removing them to another jurisdiction to face, who knows what the evidence is going to be in this trial, and took his wife for good measure. I mean, there's no suggestion that I've heard yet that his wife's some co-conspirator in this drugs and arms operation that they are suggesting that Maduro was operating whilst he was a sitting head of state. The whole thing's just remarkable. And then we have, Maduro is considered objectively as a dictator. He wasn't popular. Many people had left Venezuela because of human rights issues. His political opponent had been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. So all these things speak to him not being a particularly pleasant individual or someone who maybe anyone would want as a head of state in a neighboring country. But the idea that he's kidnapped and removed in this way and is then paraded in shackles getting off a plane in New York is pretty horrifying. And I guess the reason that I think most of all that it's horrifying is that this went so well. I can't see the administration in Washington resisting the temptation to have another go with someone else. And one other point maybe, and I'm sure Ozan maybe you would have made this point anyway, he's removed Maduro and his wife, but he's left everyone else in charge. It's not regime change. It's removal of the head of the regime and allowing his deputy to step up. And as much as America will say, we'll just do a second strike, we'll now remove the vice president who's been put in as president, if that's what Trump decides to do. Everyone's on notice this time. And I'm sure it won't be as easily done as a second attempt, if that's what they're intending to do. Those people celebrating are now at risk of being asked to go back to their home country of Venezuela because it's safe. So celebrating them in the US and being deported. And it's not a regime change. It's a change of one individual and his wife. And what's left seems to be the ongoing administration, but with American oil companies getting concessions? I mean, is that really what everyone is the change anything significant in reality? And you know, I don't know. I mean, what message does it send to others in the world as well? There's so many issues tied up in this.
Yeah, look, I don't know where to start unpacking this, to be honest with you. I think it's I share all your sentiments. I think one of the things that we probably need to do is put things simply, maybe give some context as to how Venezuela got here. Many people probably haven't been following Venezuela's gradual, somewhat actually sudden demise, probably about 10, 15 years ago. It is sitting on one of the biggest oil reserves in the world. I believe it is the biggest according to many statistics. It has been ruled by successive governments, and it was previously there was a guy called Chavez, President Chavez, who was kind of the poster boy for communism and socialism, and the Republicans in the US made it a pastime to criticize him. In fact, if our listeners remember, Trump pretty much accused Chavez from his grave of being involved in the voting systems, which led, according to Trump and his cronies, for him to be defeated in the 2020 election. So the US has had some significant issue with Venezuela. There is it has been in the last 10 years undergoing significant economic strain, significant recession. There have been significant reports of famine, human rights abuses. The economy is a complete disaster. I think it would be fair to say that Venezuela is a failed state, and there is no doubt that he should have been toppled quite some time ago. And this is where it gets a little bit interesting, because some argue that he lost the last election. Certainly the Trump administration doesn't accept the last election. And many foreign observers who were there observing the election also expressed very similar concerns about the way that the election was run. So there's now an issue of an illegitimate president, one that's been linked for some time, and this is not just Trump, but I think it's been 4 or 5 years. The Department of Justice has linked his administration and his inner circle to significant involvement in the drug trafficking, along with some of I think, a faction of the Colombian guerrilla group FARC. So there's a lot of reasons to get rid of Maduro, but I share Rodney's sentiment. Is this really the way? And particularly, Trump has made a no secret of the fact that about the only thing he's interested in is to go in there and ensure that US oil companies can get their fair share of oil, because that's another thing that's been very upsetting for the Americans for some time. As Maduro and previous, previous president were quite close to China and Russia and Iran, and were favoring, selling oil to them. They made it very difficult for US oil companies to operate, etc. So it's been, I think it's been brewing for some time. Now, if you're in MAGA, you probably think this is fantastic. Trump's dealt with a problem that should have been dealt with a long time ago. If you're a Venezuelan, I'm assuming that you're probably happy, and that you'll probably, if I was a Venezuelan, either living in Venezuela or US or many other places that they've migrated to because of the horrendous economic situations, I would probably be happy as well. But there are so many dictators in the world. There are no shortage of dictators in the world, and this is why we have international norms. Where do we stop? What is the acceptable conditions under which a government can send its special forces and bomb the capital of a city and kidnap its president? Like, who sets those rules? in the past we've relied on international norms. I mean, do we really want to live in a world where a country can just go in there and go into another country and kidnap the president? And you know, and you can argue all you like about the election result, and you know, personally, I would have probably thought that he was an illegitimate president as well. But there are other dictators in the world that don't even have elections. Why aren't we going in there and you know, kidnapping them in the middle of the night? So there's so many questions that need to be answered, and you know, and if we just accept for a minute that the ends justify the means, you know, the way that this has actually played out, I'm pretty sure the end outcome is not going to be very good, because Trump, you know, let's not forget, Trump himself tried to incite an insurrection. He tried to overturn a fair and democratic election because he lost it. He is saying that he's going to effectively oversee the transition into democracy. Now, wherever you sit on the political fence or wherever you sit on the political spectrum, let's face it, you know, when Trump says he's going to oversee a process to democratize a country, people have questions. And again, you don't have to be an anti-Trump person or a never-Trumper or have Trump derangement syndrome or anything like that. I think he has a track record of himself not being all that democratic. So for all those people dancing on the streets, I get it. I would also be dancing on the streets probably, but you know, they need to have perspective because where this is going, you know, we've seen this movie before. You know, in Iraq, in other places, there could be a vacuum and things could just get very, very much worse.
So a lot to unpack there, but let's start with the reaction from the world. To both your points that you've made, this is, I mean, it's not unprecedented. This has happened in the history of the globe many times. It's a US acting like an imperial superpower, similar to how other imperial powers and superpowers have done in the past. However, this particular time, how do we evaluate the reaction from the West, the East, from across the world? And what sort of are some of the reactions that have caught your attention, Rodney, starting with you?
Yeah, so obviously, I looked to see what Starmer said in the UK, and he talked about, you know, needing to be apprised of all the facts before, you know, making any conclusion in relation to this. And everyone's made this, you know, Western European leaders making similar noises where they want to say, um, they didn't support it, as Starmer made clear, wasn't involved in it, didn't have prior notice of it, or wasn't provided with notice of it. I mean, that's a different thing because you could know through your own intelligence network rather than from the Americans directly in a formal way that something might be afoot, but very clearly trying to distance the UK from Trump's actions without going so far as to anger him or annoy him or make certain accusations. It's going to be detrimental to UK and US relations and in effect, you know, security, economy, economic links and defense links and so on, and whether, you know, that can be preserved, but by maintaining some dignity and at least saying that it's not something we would have done, that it's yeah, it's unlawful, or we're going to establish the facts, but we weren't involved in the case of his reaction. But I think it's really difficult, and you know, Denmark must be sitting now thinking about Greenland. Because the other thing you got to remember is America wouldn't have done this, or Trump wouldn't have done this, because I'm going to say he's a classic bully in my mind, and that he'll only pick in someone who can't respond. And militarily, Venezuela, despite what they've bought from Russia and China, were clearly not able to respond. He wouldn't have done this to a better equipped um, defense uh, military in a different jurisdiction. He did this because it was easy. And the same in many ways would apply to a rather sparsely populated place like Greenland. So, um, yes, the Europeans are trying to balance their response with enough criticism to say to distance themselves from the act, but not so much as to anger the perpetrator. It's very sad that people can't say what they actually think, and sadly that's where we are in international diplomacy, where we just people are accepting and looking the other way when things are happening that they fundamentally disagree with, but are afraid to voice opposition. They're trying to signal it through coded language, which is just it's deeply unsatisfactory.
Well, a couple of countries were pretty explicit in their support for this, starting with you know President Prime Minister Netanyahu, who would have expected, and then you've got Argentina with their mad president coming out and saying this is an excellent thing. And then I think Ecuador came out very much in support of it. Even, so you've got a few countries who, came out in support. You've got many countries, as Rodney said, sitting on the fence, France being a very notable example of that. Australia as well, Canada to a certain degree. And then you've got some very, very strong opposition from the usual suspects: China, India, Russia, Iran, obviously, and countries like Indonesia, Malaysia. I think a lot of Asia is actually quite opposed to it. And then you've got others who you would have thought probably may have been warmer to such a thing, such as the Italian Prime Minister, quite a ideologically someone who's close to Trump and I think good friends with Trump, etc., coming out with a lukewarm response. So, uh, you know, my read on this is that, as Rodney said, I think there is largely significant concern, very little support in the international community for this, but I think people are just too scared to voice their opinions in case Trump whacks a massive tariff on them. That's how simple international relations has become in 2026, and I think it's a really sad state of affairs.
Well,
Am I right in thinking that the Chinese didn't respond until today?
Yes.
So I quite like that. I quite like the idea of we're going to say this isn't a good thing. We disagree with it. Maduro should be released, but we're not going to let your actions interrupt our weekend. We'll come to it on Monday morning. Felt that that was a little bit not letting America dictate when they responded and how they responded, whether it had to be urgent or whatever. We'll do it in our own time, thank you. So that's something I think which was quite noticeable in my view.
Absolutely.
well, I think Starmer did something similar when he said that he wanted to establish the facts and talk to Trump before making a definitive statement. I mean, it all comes down to what you both said around there's a clear uneasiness amongst world leaders, but there's also a desire to not get offside with Trump, and we've seen the dangers around what could happen with that. Just coming back to a point you made, Ozan, around the new. I'll paraphrase what you said, but a new world order in terms of international relations. I mean, what caught my eye was Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's. What he told reporters is, well, if dictators can be dealt with in this way, then the United States of America knows what it should do next. I'm guessing implying Russia and the situation that's happening between Russia and Ukraine. I mean, if you're China, how does this not allow you to do the same in Taiwan? If you're Russia, how does this not allow you to? If this is now what we do internationally, and that there's a set of countries where you can just go in and depose dictators and change regimes. What happens when it's beyond that too? And I mean, where do we draw the line if this is how we now behave on the international stage in 2026?
Well, if you're in MAGA or a Republican who's pretending to like Trump because it suits them, you would say that this is very different to the Russia situation. He would say that this is very different to the China situation because Trump is not after territorial expansion. This is not an imperialistic move to take over the country. This is to prevent drugs, illegal immigrants, the gangs from all of the asylums, mental asylums, etc. Whatever Trump's line is, that makes no sense. You would say that this is to prevent all of that happening, and Russia's is very different. Russia is trying to take over Ukraine's territory. But if you unpeel that and just scratch a little bit off those political talking points, it becomes pretty clear that there is no real difference, because whilst Trump may not want to take over the territory of Venezuela, he's made no secret of the fact that he wants to take over the oil reserves. In fact, he's said he's going to control the oil reserves until there's a proper government in place that can properly utilize and exploit those oil reserves. So, whether it's oil reserves or land, doesn't matter. I think the intention is very clear. And if there was real concern about human rights, real concern about dictators, and generally speaking, very terrible leaders around the world, I think the three of us could probably sit down for 5 minutes and make a list of 50 other countries that the US should take over tomorrow. So it's not a. This is, I think, the new world order is basically that there is no order, and everything's driven now by power. Who has more power? And if you kind of go back a little bit as well, a lot of this has to do with the US demonstrating, exhibiting its supremacy, military-wise, economic-wise, as a very clear sign to not so much Russia or anything. I don't think they take Russia all that seriously, but of course to China. I think this is a very clear sign to China to say, I can do this, and I am still, we are still the economic and military superpower, and and we don't have to follow international laws, and we get to set the rules. So there's absolutely nothing tomorrow stopping China from doing the same. I would like to say Russia, but Russia did that 3 years ago. So yeah, this is a new world order, which has thrown all of the international norms that have been in place since World War II out the window. And we're in a process, I think we've discussed this previously in the podcast, we're in a process of trying to figure out what this now looks like. And that's also why it's dangerous, because we're in a process where we're trying to understand what is acceptable and what is not. And when you have these sorts of precedents taking place, and when you have these sorts of examples taking place, to Rodney's point earlier, things become normal. We're all human, and you get desensitized to things, and we suddenly go, oh, okay, I guess that's what countries can do now. It's a very slippery slope, and it's a very, very dangerous path to take.
Well, he's already warned the incoming leader that, if she doesn't behave, then things might look a little bit differently. Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, indicated that, Colombia could be next on the list. I mean, it's an extraordinary way to start the year, an extraordinary sort of set of circumstances. But what now happens, Rodney, in terms of, who runs Venezuela? Trump said, well, we'll just run it. We'll run it until it gets fixed or whatever. Is he like the de facto president now? And how does it sort of operate?
I mean, so this is the real point, I think, in all of this that shows how the action is very media exciting, but potentially lacking in substance, because it's the same regime that continue to run Venezuela. Had it been the same in Iraq when America under Bush went for regime change, they would have left all the Ba'ath Party officials and so on still in place, and not tried to remove that layer of government or administration. And it'd be like removing Saddam and removing Gaddafi in Libya and leaving his son in charge. That's really what he's done here, and that's why it's really about watching what happens next. I do think, though, if we look back at the last number of months, whether we look in the early part of the year when Rubio was off on his little tour of South America, visiting heads of state and so on, the amount of times that Trump complained about Venezuela and about Maduro and drugs and etc. And this whole build up, it's actually been very well signposted to where we've ended up. It's just that no one expected this to be the final act of, I guess, this section, because we obviously have to know what happens, what happens next. And there is precedent for this, although it happened differently and it was after he was president. But the Honduran President Hernandez was tried on drugs and weapons charges during the Biden administration, was sentenced
Yeah,
and then pardoned by Trump after
by
doing
Trump.
18 months
Yeah,
of a 45-year sentence.
yep.
And that so that's important to bear in mind too, and that's why I keep adding in his wife. I'm not sure Mr. Hernandez's wife was actually arrested and put through the same process simply by virtue of being married to someone who was a former president at that stage. So the only
Hmm.
real difference with Maduro is, one, they didn't, disclose evidence. Hernandez's brother was convicted originally, then his trial papers were unsealed, and it turned out that the ex-president was said to be a co-conspirator. Then when he lost the presidency, there was an attempt to extradite him. So the one thing that's in favor there is process, where in this case it's full military action in support of an attempt to, or a successful arrest of a foreign head of state, where lives have been taken in order to secure that arrest and removal to the home jurisdiction. And it's a very different scenario in that sense. But the idea isn't new. And he was convicted. He was then pardoned by Trump, which makes a bit of a mockery um, of uh, of the idea that he wants to remove these heads of state who are facilitating, the importation and poisoning of decent Americans through narcotics and so on. But when he takes that particular action, but I think he's had an obsession with Maduro for some time, and I think what we're seeing is the end point of that. Not about democracy in Venezuela, not about regime change. Yes, get access to the oil. And we haven't touched on the fact that not only has Venezuela got more oil in the ground than anywhere else in the world, it's a type of oil that America doesn't have through
Crude oil, yeah.
yeah, through shale and so on. And therefore, American refineries want access to this type of oil. And the other alternative options to secure it are, I believe, Canada and Russia, the main sources. So, that whole war for oil or regime change for oil is a well-trodden path in sort of American recent history. But this isn't regime change. This is the removal of Maduro is a threat to the regime to say you're next if you don't play ball. You can stay there. You can exploit your citizens. You can not attain very high human rights standards. You can leave people in poverty. Better still, we're going to send you people back. But what you have to do is give us access to the oil, be a bit less friendly with China and other states that we're not wishing to be too close to ourselves, and certainly don't do it on our doorstep. And you can stay in power. And you can, in effect, get the Hernandez pardon by not being arrested or detained or toppled yourself. And that seems to be what the proposition is for the vice president, as she's sworn in as the president, and the clear message from the US, as well as that wholly patronizing um, um, assessment by Trump of the suitability of our recent Nobel laureate to take over, having won the last election, was that she was nice but probably not right for this for this job, or probably not popular enough or doesn't have enough support. That means within the regime that he doesn't want to change.
No, absolutely. And look, there's an excellent point that I think we need to unpack there as well, and that's around kind of, what you mentioned that there were signposts, he had flagged this enough time, etc., but no one expected him to actually go ahead and do it. And I think that's a very valid assessment because most people voted for Trump because they were sick of never-ending wars. They were sick of the US expending, resources, time, effort, soldiers, etc., on foreign lands and and expending resources on foreign problems. And it's exactly what the MAGA movement or America First movement is against. And you're seeing some of the rifts kind of further developing between some of the MAGA personalities and Donald Trump on this issue as well, as it has been for some time on the Epstein issue. So it would be interesting to know how the domestic political factors came into the whole calculus as well.
Yeah, look, there's no doubt in my mind that the specter of Epstein still plays out in a lot of decision making that's taking place. I think the distinction within MAGA for the forever wars is they're not committing American money, American lives, and huge deal of focus on trying to democratize and improve other countries. They simply don't care. They're just toppling people that they don't think are going to act in a way that they'd like them to act. And therefore, it might be that MAGA doesn't see this as a forever war or the type of foreign policy that America's found itself in recent decades. And that this is something very different, that it's an action, it's done, it's closed off, whatever. A little bit like what happened in Iran
In Iran,
with
yeah.
the
Yeah.
greatest bombing mission ever in the history of humanity,
Well,
as described by Trump, where this is the most amazing military action since World War II or something, I think he said, and
but
then it's done. And then, what happens next? Well, Iran still has the same regime. Maybe we'll come on to discuss Iran
before we get to
briefly.
Iran, though, like
Yeah.
before we get to Iran, that is actually very interesting because that seems to be the general kind of consensus within MAGA that this is we're showcasing the US as military might, etc. But I guess what happens when if and when the Venezuelans don't play ball and they start to kind of you know show the signs that they're not going to be a puppet regime, etc. Do you get boots on the ground? And if there are, and he hasn't ruled it out, but if there are boots on the ground, that sentiment can change pretty quickly, as it has in the past. As soldiers start coming home in body bags, this sort of stuff is not great politics for MAGA.
No, no, and that is the big risk. What, if the regime calls us bluff,
Yeah.
and says,
Um,
yeah, can we have Mr. Maduro back? If not, well, we're not going to do anything for your oil concessions. We're not going to do anything for all these requests you've made, that we start trying to negotiate with you, because it's not going
mhm.
to be the same experience if they now try to dip into this again and try and poke the regime further, because they're going to have to commit troops,
Yep. Yep.
and that means the loss of lives. The other thing is, unlike what's happening to an extent in Russian occupied Ukraine or what's been happening in Gaza, if America go in a heavy-handed way into Venezuela, the world's cameras will be there reporting on it,
Hmm.
and it'll be a very uh, difficult sell, I suspect, as civilian
Well,
lives might be lost and so on. So this, this is a game of bluff or poker or whatever that's being played out now, and it really is about what happens next.
well, I mean, if you take what the newly appointed President Rodriguez is saying, she's saying that there's only one president in this country, and his name is Nicolas Maduro. And apparently, she made these comments in a televised kind of, media briefing, um, with the Interior Minister, Defense Minister, and Foreign Minister on her side, as well as her brother Jorg. Um, we will not be anyone's colony. What is being done to Venezuela is barbaric. I mean, these are not words of a regime that is accepted being the puppet of the US. But again, it could just be politics, and you don't know what goes on in the
Yeah,
background.
this feels a little bit like talk tough in public, concede everything in private to me. But who knows?
Exactly. It could be. It could be. But also, I mean, politically, what it also says to you is for every one person that's dancing on the streets, rightfully, who's Venezuelan, celebrating Maduro leaving, what statements like that also say to me is that there's significant political pressure, um, on the new president not to be the US's puppets, and that also is a very interesting dynamic,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, uh, there may be very well be some Venezuelans who would rather starve than be colonized by the US and lose their oil. And it's all very complicated, and I think that this whole kind of notion that everybody in Venezuela is so happy to see, Maduro deposed and sent to the US. I think this notion is not correct, and otherwise why would the president elect, or the new president, sorry, feel the need to make such comments?
Yeah, I absolutely, Ozan, agree with you on that. There's a lot more to play out on this.
I just want to come back briefly to the point you made, Ozan, about how this plays out in the MAGA movement and for Trump on a domestic front. The MAGA movement has been known for, no forever wars, and they've said, given Iraq and Afghanistan as examples, as those forever wars. We've seen what happens to those countries, the disaster that those countries both ended up being because of the US intervention. You could argue whether it was a disaster beforehand, but right now, for this specific context, I think we know what's all, it's a story that's long been told, and what has happened when the US has withdrawn, et cetera, et cetera. So that has been the ultimate MAGA position, that it's an America first, no forever wars, it's our affairs, our countries. Could Trump and the MAGA movement justify this by saying, well, it's about protecting US sovereignty in terms of, the escalating drug crisis, the border crossings, etc. Is that the card that they need to play? Because surely they can't play privately or publicly the oil card, right? You can't say, well, it's in our best national interest to have that oil. Well, sure, but at what expense and at what cost? And do you just go and then, not that anyone would ever have the power to do this, but then could we then justify other countries doing the same to the US, for example? I'm just trying to think of, how do they justify this politically, first and foremost amongst themselves, before to the wider public?
If it was any other president, I would have said that, of course, they've got to play the sovereignty, and we're stopping hundreds of thousands of people a year dying from drugs. Venezuela is a major part of that, etc., etc. But that's any other president. That argument has more holes in it than Swiss cheese. So at the end of the day, Trump is not disciplined to continue running that argument, because he's going to get a lot of pushback from what he would deem as the mainstream media, but also even within the MAGA movement, he's getting pushback. So I think he's going to very quickly, as there are already signs of him doing so, revert back to the whole, well, this is good for our economy, we need oil, drill. I think, he's already started. He's already said that this is, we need oil. We're gonna, we should benefit from these oil reserves, not China and Russia. So I don't think that he's making much of a secret of that. But again, I just don't think he's disciplined enough to run a narrative that might actually get people to kind of rally around the flag and get behind his actions. Even the MAGA people, I don't think they're buying it. And now, if the Epstein stuff hadn't have happened, I would have said probably the MAGA people would have rallied around him a lot more stronger. But he's really shaken up the trust of the movement and the base, and he's now made enemies of a number of quite quite influential and vocal people in the MAGA movement who are undermining his standing with MAGA. So the MAGA movement are no longer getting one side of the story, which was always whatever Trump decided that it was. They're now getting from people they respect. Now they're getting very different sides to the story around Epstein, around Israel. So this has got the potential to be another issue in the line of two or three issues that have come up in the last 12 months in his first year that are starting to cause a real rift in the MAGA movement.
So we've already touched on the international community's reaction. We've seen Denmark saying you ain't touching Greenland. We've seen some other countries sort of potentially a bit nervous, and some claiming that Europe needs to wake up to itself a little bit in terms of what's actually happening. There's unrests on the streets of Iran. I mean, is there any legitimate threat that Trump could actually go beyond the Americas and he's had his eyes on Iran for a while. Are we now exaggerating and taking this somewhere where it doesn't need to go, or are we sticking with the theme that anything is apparently possible in 2026, 5 days in?
I'm going with the latter. Whilst I think it's very difficult for Delta Force to go into Tehran in the middle of the night and kidnap the Ayatollah, I think he's signalled that he would be happy to take action if in the recent Iranian protests the authorities killed more protesters, and they don't look like they're stopping killing protesters, because I think now it's more than 20 who've died in the recent protests. So I wouldn't rule out some sort of action that he would take.
Yeah, look, I think you gotta say that nothing's impossible, but I don't think that's the next forward action by America. I think we're more likely to see some build up of threats in South America or Latin America rather than something happening in the Middle East. So I don't think.
Well,
I mean, I don't know. I don't know whether the Ayatollah would have his wife taken with him as well. I know I'm slightly fixed on this point. I don't think you can just arrest people and their spouses if you think that they've committed a criminal offense. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Whilst I think all of us would like to see, the regime change for all of our Iranian brothers and sisters, I think Trump's got his hand on enough oil for now, so there's probably not as much incentive for him to go after Iran.
Well, who would have thought we'd be starting 2026 off with this story? But there you go. Nothing is surprising anymore in this new world. Gents, wonderful to be back for a new season and a new year. Happy New Year once again. See you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.